Thank you for joining us this morning for the Latino State of the Census 2020. I am Luby Navarro, member of the School Board of Miami-Dade County Public Schools and also the co-chair of the National Latino Commission on the Census 2020. Today, we are releasing the Commission's report with our findings and recommendations on how Congress, the administration, and the Census can act to ensure that the Latino community is fully counted in the Census 2020. The National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, NALEO Education Fund, established the Commission in June 2018 to help ensure a fair and accurate count of the Latino community and all of the America's residents in the Census 2020. The mission of the NALEO Education Fund is to facilitate the full participation of Latinos in America's political process from citizenship to public service. Consistent with the NALEO Education Fund's mission, we have been working to highlight the importance of a fair and accurate Census 2020 count of the Latino community and all of America's residents for the strength of our nation's democracy and for the prosperity and well-being. Thus, the Commission has had two primary purposes. First, we intended to bring public attention to the challenges posed by the ongoing and emergency policy developments to achieving a fair and accurate Census 2020 count. We also intended to highlight the national and local policy recommendations and best practices to address these challenges. The Bipartisan Commission, which I have the honor to serve on with Secretary of State Alex Padilla, which you get to hear, and also our commissioners, was comprised of 9 commissioners and 1 guest commissioner. That includes the Latino elected and appointed officials, as well as civic leaders from across the nation. These leaders represent all of the levels of office and reflect the diversity of our Latino community. Between September 2018 and March 2019, the Commission held 5 hearings to compile critical information from the field to hear from a broad range of experts. We held hearings in Los Angeles, California, New York, San Antonio, Texas, Orlando, Florida, and Columbus, Ohio. In addition, members of the public submitted testimony to the Commission directly. Ultimately, we received testimony from more than 50 well-informed persons nationwide. All of this testimony informed the Commission's findings and recommendations, which will be presented today. At this time, I have the great honor, and I would like to introduce the Commission's co-chair, the Honorable Secretary of State of California, Mr. Alex Padilla. In addition to Secretary Padilla, serves as the chair of the California's Complete Count Committee. Please help me give a round of applause to our co-chair, Secretary of State Alex Padilla. Welcome.
Thank you, Luby, for the introduction. I'm going to pause for 30 seconds, see if I can get a cue from staff about the slides.
We're still trying to get AV to fix it.
Okay, all right. So then we'll continue. We'll catch the slides up in a few minutes. Well, thank you all for being here this morning. It's obviously a very critical moment on a very critical subject matter, the 2020 census. I know I'm preaching to the choir a little bit here when I reiterate how critical the decennial census is and how critical it is for us to do everything possible to achieve a fair and accurate count of our nation's population. That was the point of forming this commission to begin with, because of the various challenges unique to the 2020 census above and beyond the already difficult task of achieving a complete count every 10 years. The 2020 census will take place at a time of heightened fear and distrust, not just of government, but of the federal government specifically, given the political climate that we find ourselves in. And if our elections experience and confidence in our elections is any indicator, then we also have the challenge of ensuring people trust not just submitting their data to the Census Bureau, but the electronic transmittal of the data, given that this is a digital first census as well. And so that's what the commission took on through the series of field hearings throughout the country, hearing directly from community leaders in all regions of the United States of what they were thinking, what they were hearing, what unique challenges and suggestions for overcoming these challenges that they could make to our commission that would in turn be digested and now appear in the form of recommendations to the administration, to the Bureau specifically, to Congress, and to others. So let me reiterate the purpose of the census again. Most people know that the census drives federal funding formulas for the next 10 years. We know that each state's share of housing dollars, of education dollars, of healthcare dollars, et cetera, rely on a complete count of their state's population. But it's more than just that. Census data also drives the reapportionment process, literally determining each state's voice in our Congress at the federal level. And by extension, census data is utilized for the redistricting process. So for those who care about fair redistricting and one person, one vote, a population undercount undermines all of that. But that seems to be what we're headed towards. I mentioned a minute ago that one of the unique challenges of 2020 is the digital format of the census without full appreciation of the digital divide that still exists in America. A divide both on digital access to high-speed internet and digital literacy, even for some who have that access in their community. It's why we are disappointed on the one hand that the federal administration at this point is not the partner that it typically has been in prior census to achieve that complete count, to do the outreach and the preparation and the testing necessary to ensure an effective survey. And so we see state leaders and local leaders doing some unique things to overcome these challenges. Latino leaders across the country testified to this commission of their efforts at the local level to start communicating to their constituents, communicating at all jurisdictions about the coming census, the importance of the census, and that resources would be brought to bear to help those local communities overcome the challenges of the way this census is being implemented. Things like opening up libraries and community centers, for example, as assistance centers to try to offset the closure of assistance centers by the Census Bureau that have been announced. Want to offer just a couple of examples of what we're doing in California. In California, Governor Newsom has named me chair of the California Complete Count Committee. Many states will form some sort of committee like this every 10 years, but in California, we're experiencing an unprecedented level of investment in early outreach and planning. And I'll be part of overseeing the committee's work, trying to mobilize different departments and agencies of state government to put the word out on census and census participation, and working through partnerships with local governments, with foundations, and with community-based organizations and other civic leadership organizations like NALEO to reach as many of our constituents as possible. One example I'm personally proud of, and I put this out there as a challenge to other states. 2020 is also going to be an election year. The California primary is in March, prior to that census window starting April 1st. And we will utilize something as simple as our state voter information guide to distribute information about the census. Our voter information guide reaches 13.5 million households in the state of California. That's a significant penetration for a state of a population of 40 million. California has compiled nearly 8.5 million email addresses of registered voters that we can utilize to communicate pretty efficiently and cost effectively to a significant size of our population. We'll do much more than just that, but those, I think, are two powerful examples of how we can leverage existing communication between state government and the general public about the importance of the census. But the challenges to a complete count are clear. Time is running out, but there is still time. And this report calls out some very concrete and impactful recommendations of what the administration, the Bureau, and Congress can do to still make this a successful census. Chief among them, they can make a decision either at the Bureau level or through legislative action to remove the question about citizenship from the census. It does not have to be decided upon by the Supreme Court. We can save them of that decision. Congress, through the budget and appropriations process, can invest in the census in this final, most critical stage to ensure that the outreach is there and the assistance is there for people across the country. And we do ask the administration to ensure that the proper messaging is out about security of the census data that we're asking people to submit. Similar to election security, I drew that analogy earlier, we need the public to be confident that the data they submit will be private and secure so that they can participate with the utmost of confidence. We only have one chance to get the census right every 10 years. 2020 is no exception. So we need to do all that we can to ensure we're maximizing our chance of success. There's still time to turn it around, but time is running out. At this point in time, I'd like to introduce the CEO of the NALEO Educational Fund. He's also the executive director of NALEO and one of the longest-serving members of the U.S. Census Bureau's Advisory Committee. Please welcome Arturo Vargas.
I'm sure you all enjoyed the visions of Europe and Hawaii, it seems, but we actually had some slides to show you all.
See if get this working for you here.
Bright colors. Let me go ahead and continue with our presentation. The NALEO Educational Fund established this commission because we felt it was an absolute necessity for the administration, for Congress, and for the Census Bureau to hear directly from the community, which is why this report is entitled The Community Speaks, the report of the National Latino Commission on Census 2020. The recommendations that are being shared with you today may sound familiar, but they are all based on the data. I'll let the gentleman continue. Okay. Right. They're based on data that was collected through a series of hearings. And quickly, just to share with you who our commission were. Again, the commission was co-chaired by board member Louis Navarro, who you heard from Miami-Dade County Public Schools, and from the Secretary of State of California, Alex Padilla. Our commissioners included Lily Kavanaugh from Ohio, James Diosa from Rhode Island, Pauline Medrano from Dallas, Texas, Rosemary Rodriguez from Colorado, David Santiago from Florida, Walter Tejada from close by here in Virginia, and John Vargas from Torrance, California, and we had a guest commissioner, Representative Carlos Tobon from Rhode Island. So the composition being national, bipartisan, and from all levels of government. There were 5 hearings held by the commission: Los Angeles, New York, San Antonio, Orlando, and Columbus. These were regional hearings. Testimony was provided from people throughout the large regions of the country where these hearings were based, and not just from the Latino community. The commission heard testimony from leaders in the African American community, Asian Pacific Islander community, LGBTQ communities, other communities, because we know that for every person not counted in the census, and it's person that's in the Constitution, that is entitled to be and required to be counted, for every person not counted in the census, all of us are harmed. So the community spoke, and today we're revealing the findings of the commission. First of all, we have recommendations for Congress. The Constitution actually gives direct authority to the Congress for carrying out the Constitution. The Census Bureau was established to carry out the actual job of the Constitution, but the authority to see that this is done was empowered into the Congress by our framing document. Congress holds the purse strings and the resources for the census itself. So the Commission's recommendations to Congress are the following. One, Congress must not rely on the U.S. Supreme Court or the administration to act to remove the proposed citizenship question from Census 2020. It must enact legislation to eliminate the question now. And in fact, as we sit here at the National Press Club today, the Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives at this moment is holding a markup on fiscal year 2020 appropriations. It includes language that would prohibit the inclusion of any question in the 2020 census that was not tested in the 2018 end-to-end test. The Census Bureau knows that any question that appears on the form must be adequately tested. And so Congress now has an opportunity to support research and science by ensuring that only those adequately tested questions appear on the 2020 questionnaire. Congress must also continue to conduct oversight hearings to determine Secretary Ross's rationale for adding the question and ensure greater accountability by the executive branch for its actions. Again, appropriations must be complete for the Census Bureau to carry out its job. $8.5 billion in our estimation is what is required by the Bureau in order to carry out its tasks next year, and the money must be made available now so that there is no ambiguity about whether or not the Census Bureau will have the resources it needs. Finally, members of Congress are uniquely positioned to make the case for the return on the investment of funds for an accurate Census 2020. This funding repays itself, often many times over, since an accurate count confers so many benefits to our nation and our communities. Recommendations for the White House and the Department of Commerce. The Commission recommends that the Department of Commerce reverse its decision to add the citizenship question to Census 2020. The Commission also recommends that the White House and the Department of Commerce must send a strong and clear message that will comply with the protections in federal law that safeguard the confidentiality of information provided in the census. This must be a top-to-bottom effort, which starts with the President and is amplified through every federal agency, and administration officials should cease making statements or taking actions that suggest that they may ignore or undermine these protections. The bulk of the recommendations, however, are for the Census Bureau itself, and they're divided in a number of different themes. All of these recommendations are included in the materials that you have before you. We'll try to go through these as quickly as possible. They begin with recommendations with regard to the citizenship question. Again, the Commission recommends that the Bureau advocate with the administration to comply with the confidentiality protections for census data and ensure its own compliance. If the citizenship question were to remain on the Census 2020 questionnaire, the Bureau must take aggressive actions to mitigate its known negative impact. The Bureau must revise the Integrated Communications and Partnership Program to consider the impact of the question, which includes testing on the messages and messengers who might be able to overcome the public's fear of participating in the census as a result. The Bureau must also provide stakeholders with important information about how the enumeration will proceed if the question remains, including information relating to what will happen if respondents leave the citizenship question blank or any question blank, and whether and how the Bureau will use administrative records to impute answers to the question. There are recommendations on the overall outreach and communication strategy for the Bureau. The Bureau must use its FY 2019 funding for its Integrated Communications and Partnership Program and local assistance activities in a sound and effective manner, adhering to the mandates in the appropriations report language for increasing partnership program staff, expanding targeted communications activities, and establishing community-based questionnaire assistance centers in hard-to-count communities. The Bureau should promote and support a broad and diverse range of partnership and outreach strategies, which are enumerated in the report. While the Bureau has conducted a significant amount of research on the messages that most resonate with hard-to-count communities, it should also work with partners who are familiar with those communities and the best way to reach them. The Bureau should conduct its partnership program in a robust way on an ongoing basis, rather than just ramping up for each decennial enumeration. It should be an evergreen program. The Secretary mentioned that I sit on the Census Bureau's National Advisory Committee. One of the recommendations we had 10 years ago was for the Census Bureau to maintain its partnership program in a robust way in between decennials, so that when 2020 came around, the Bureau would have the expertise and the staff capacity at the ready, instead of ramping up as it is doing now. The Commission also recommends that the Bureau should clarify in its job application website and in other materials that it will hire work-authorized non-citizens as outreach staff and enumerators where they are unable to find sufficient U.S. citizens with the necessary language and cultural skills. And the Bureau should provide real-time feedback to community groups as the enumeration proceeds, providing them with response rates so that communities themselves could do rapid response. With regard to reaching residents in non-traditional housing, all components of the Bureau's address canvassing, Integrated Communications and Partnership Program, and other operational plans must take into account the diversity of living arrangements in our nation, including rural residents in remote areas, persons displaced by natural disasters or economic challenges, the homeless, and the incarcerated. It is particularly important that the Bureau have the effective strategies for identifying households in these areas and for reaching them effectively. The Secretary mentioned that this is the first census that will make a response mode available online. The Commission heard a tremendous amount of concern from the community throughout the country about a digital census. As a result, the Commission recommends that the Bureau should enhance its communication with stakeholders about the extent of its testing of the online form. Many public members perceive that the technology has not been tested adequately and fear that the Bureau is unprepared to implement it. While we may get assurances from the Bureau that they're ready to go, the public doesn't know that, and it needs this information. The Bureau must enhance the accessibility of the online form by making it easy to use on mobile devices. And minutes used on these mobile devices should be at no cost. The Bureau needs to ensure that it both implements the best possible cybersecurity practices and also educates the public about these protections. The Commission recommends that the Bureau must consider the self-response preferences of different population groups for its outreach and operational plans and ensure that the community understands that it is able to reply online, on paper, and by phone. With regard to reaching and engaging residents in their own language, we know there will be one bilingual form available, that is in English and Spanish. That is of benefit to the Latino community. But we heard from representatives from many other communities that have many language needs, particularly in the Asian Pacific Islander community. So as a result, the Commission recommends that the Bureau should expand the number of languages it provides for internet self-response and for online questionnaire assistance. In light of the smaller number of field staff it intends to deploy, the Commission recommends that the Bureau must make the hiring of staff with linguistic and cultural competency a high priority. And the Commission recommends that the Bureau must help ensure that resources from one area are shared with other areas and should promote the sharing of resources between language communities. In other words, if One area of the country is particularly effective in providing languages, translations in a particular language. They should be available nationwide so that other communities could benefit from that. We had thought that this was going to be the census that finally addressed the crisis of the undercount of very young children. We know that in Census 2010, there was a net undercount of 1 million children, meaning that 2.2 million children were not counted in the census, 1.2 million children were overcounted in the census. These weren't the same children. The children not counted were children of color, children in poverty. The children overcounted did not reflect that. The net undercount was 1 million. 40% of those children not counted were Latino children. As a result of hearing testimony from communities around the country about the undercount of young children, the Commission recommends that the Bureau should ensure its integrated communications and partnership program includes specific messaging and strategies on counting all very young children in a household. This is particularly important because the majority of young children undercounted in 2010 were those who were left off of households who completed left off the questionnaire from households who completed the questionnaire. The Bureau should create partnerships with a broad array of government agencies, institutions, businesses, and other entities that reach families with very young children. In doing so, it should take into account the diversity of caretakers for these children, such as grandparents and foster families. The Commission recommends that the Bureau should make its Statistics in School program more robust, expanding the program more for pre-K education and creating partnerships for pre-K providers. The Commission also heard testimony about reaching older residents. And in this regard, the Commission recommends that the Bureau should make special efforts to work with government agencies and private organizations that focus on the older population. And the Bureau should recognize the importance of young people who in certain communities can motivate older residents to participate in the census and should enlist them in efforts for multi-generational outreach. That is a summary of the recommendations that have been brought forth by the Commission. I'd like to, at this time, invite a representative of the Census Bureau to share with us what he has heard from what the Commission found and provide us a little bit of a response of where the Census Bureau is in its planning. I'm delighted to introduce James Christie to the podium, the Assistant Director for Field Operations at the U.S. Census Bureau. I refer to him as Jamie because that's how the name he goes by. He's a good friend of the NALEO Educational Fund. He previously was a regional director for the Los Angeles region in the 2010 census. And I can say that he's one of the career professionals at the Bureau whose mission is to ensure that the Bureau carries out its task. So, Jamie Christie.
Well, good morning. Thank you for inviting us to be here, and on behalf of the Census Bureau, we appreciate the ability to participate in this event. I'd like to personally thank Arturo for his long service to the Census Bureau on behalf of the different activities and the roles that he plays. He's been an important partner for us. As NALEO emphasized very well in their presentation, the census is important. It's very important, and they said it better than we can say it. I'm here to say that the Census Bureau is ready to go. Arturo mentioned that. The census is ready to go. We are on track, we are on schedule, and we are within budget. Participating in this census will be easier than it ever has been. This will be the first census where you can participate online. For the first time, you can choose to respond online, by telephone, or you can mail back a paper questionnaire, or you can answer when a census enumerator comes to your door. We're also planning a robust language program, communications outreach plan, and partnership program to increase awareness, promote response, and improve response rates for targeted audience. In fact, this census, we will significantly increase the resources we've allocated to outreach and awareness. Our marketing and outreach campaign this census will be funded at a level of $500 million compared to the 2010 funding of $376 million. Our partnership program will nearly double the staff. We will have 1,500 partnership specialists nationwide devoted to working with our hardest to count communities compared to around 800 in 2010. So we are putting a lot of resources forward to make sure that we can educate the community and let them know that we're ready to go. The 2020 census will have the most comprehensive language program we've ever built. For the 2020 census, the internet self-response option and census telephone questionnaire assistance will be available in 12 non-English languages, and that will meet approximately 87% of the nation's non-English speaking households. Additionally, we will have language guides and translations available in 59 non-English languages. Those will be made available to the public to assist them in completing their census questionnaire. We want to emphasize that the census is safe. Title 13 of the United States Code obligates us to protect census answers, and that's what we will do. Incorporating state-of-the-art IT security practices to make sure that nobody besides sworn census staff can see your responses. The census asks just a few questions and takes about 10 minutes to answer. And very importantly, census responses are safe, secure, and protected by law. And I want to emphasize that law. Title 13 of the United States Code is the law that provides strong protection for the information that we collect. Penalties for release of this information is punishable by 5 years and 5 years in jail and $250,000 for each occurrence where we release responses in any way that identifies you or your household. As we speak, the census is underway. We're moving from the preparation phase to the execution phase. Much of the behind-the-scenes work is finished, and in less than 3 months, we will begin our first major field activity, our in-field address canvassing. Tens of thousands of temporary census workers will canvass their own neighborhoods and their own communities across the nation to ensure we have the most current list of addresses. And then we march to Census Day, which is April 1st of 2020, and the massive task of counting everyone. Through a series of efforts by the Census Bureau and a ton of help from our partners across the nation, we will conduct the 2020 census. In January, we start with the first enumeration in a remote village in Alaska and count our first person there, and we will continue our activity through December when we deliver the population counts to the President. As I said, you can choose to respond to the census online, by telephone, or returning a mail questionnaire, or when the census enumerator comes to your door. So in closing, our message is this. The census is safe and protected by law. It's easy to complete, and it's very important. So thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, Jamie. I know you will be leaving as you have a plane to catch, but I appreciate your participation here. I had referred to the lack of language assistance in other languages other than the ones that Jamie had mentioned. One of the communities that in particular needs language assistance more than others is the Native American community, because only Navajo will be the language in which the form will be translated. And this is the kind of information that we've been receiving through our through our process here of the commission. At this time, I'd like to invite some of the other commissioners who are present, who participate in this process, for them to make some brief remarks about what they heard. If I could be joined, please, by Lily Kavanaugh, Executive Director of the Ohio Commission on Hispanic Latino Affairs, the Honorable James Diosa, Mayor of City of Central Falls, Rhode Island, Rosemary Rodriguez, Executive Director, Together We Count Colorado, Walter Tejada, Board Member, Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority in Virginia, and Representative Carlos Tobon from the state of Rhode Island.
Hello, my name is Lily Kavanaugh, and it has been a real pleasure to represent Ohio and the Midwest and all these different folks across the country in this effort to bring the voice of the people to the Census 2020. As we walked and heard from all over the country, one message is clear. Grassroots organizations and nonprofits are ready to do the work, but we cannot do it alone. We need the engagement. We need to make sure that our recommendations are taken seriously by those in leadership, and we want to make sure that we are supported by all of you, the leaders across the country, that know that a fair and accurate census is critical for the Hispanic community in the United States. Thank you for being here, and we appreciate your work moving forward. Let's make sure that everyone is counted.
Good morning. Buenos dias. It's a pleasure to be here with all the commissioners and our executive director. I also want to take an opportunity to acknowledge the Deputy Secretary of State of Rhode Island, Gonzalo Cuervo, who's joining us on behalf of our Secretary, Nelly Gorbea. I currently co-chair the Rhode Island Complete Count Committee in Rhode Island. And as you know, Rhode Island experienced the only test run last year. It was a very concerning experience. As municipal leaders, we learned that the Census Bureau was not organized for this test run, a test run that went from potentially 3 test runs in the United States to only 1, being in the Providence County in Rhode Island. And particular to my community, Central Falls, the community that I represent, has a Latino community population of 70%. We're extremely concerned. I think the Latino community is concerned about the current political climate. The fear is real, and the inclusion of this citizenship question has brought a lot of challenges to myself and my administration, and concerns that were brought up to our commissioners throughout the country. And I will say one thing, that partnerships are going to be crucial with nonprofits, religious groups, public safety, cultural organizations, and more importantly, the local media. And I can't tell you that this issue, as many in our cities, states, Latinos in my city will face an array of issues that impact us directly in insignificant ways. Yet our response to the census could have devastating long-term consequences, impeding the growth and success of our communities and therefore our cities and states. So it's been a true pleasure to be able to serve with my colleagues here in this commission, and I hope you take great benefit from this report. Thank you. James Diosa. Yes.
Rosemary?
Thank you so much. I met Arturo Vargas in 1989, which was my first census as an activist. He was with MALDEF, and I was the county clerk and recorder for Denver. And my engagement and my partnership with NALEO has been extremely strong ever since. This commission gave me the opportunity to validate some intuitive ideas that I had about fear and apprehension and isolation in our communities, and design a project to address it. I very much appreciate NALEO and the opportunity that you presented with this commission. My colleagues were also a font of information, and I want to acknowledge NALEO's newly elected academy, which trained 2 brand new legislators from Colorado, came back to the state on fire, passed a bill to fund census engagement, and the governor's signing it tomorrow. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Walter Tejada. Aquí estamos y no nos vamos. We're here and we're not leaving. That's what we like to say with bravado around the country. Well, exactly how many is it that we're talking about? And what are the vehicles to make sure people know that those numbers carry weight? Well, I am more than honored and privileged to have been part of the National Latino Commission on Census 2020, because this provides a vehicle with factual information, not alternative facts, but factual information, so that all concerned can see that actually we have experts around the country that can speak up for the community, and they have so said, and the community has spoken, and is reflected in our NALEO report. I'm very proud to have had the opportunity to be part of this effort, and we look forward to all of you to help us continue the fight, because you know what? The work starts now. This is one part, but now we have to advocate for what was in the report, talk to the members of Congress, the administration, everyone in general. Simplemente quiero agradecer a todos los miembros de la comisión y este esfuerzo, porque ha sido un honor y un privilegio. El trabajo comienza ahora. tenemos que trabajar con todos nuestros compañeros para que este reporte de verdad tenga impacto como queremos para ayudarle a nuestra comunidad. Porque si vamos a decir que aquí estamos y no nos vamos, ¿y cuántos son entonces y dónde están? Este reporte nos ayuda a asegurarnos de que nuestra comunidad tenga voz, que nos respeten y tengamos el poder que necesitamos como comunidad. Thank you very much. Look forward to working with everybody from here on.
Good morning. I want to first and foremost thank Arturo Vargas, NALEO, for allowing me to not only be a member of your NALEO Educational Fund Board, and also I'm here as a guest commissioner on behalf of the Board of Hispanic Caucus Chairs, BHCC. Democracy continues to be challenged. The question is, what is America? Who are we becoming, or what have we become? Accepting anything but a fair and complete count would not only raise the questions of the results, but plain and simple, it's un-American. We talk about putting America, our country, first. How will that be accomplished by a fictitious account of the makeup and distribution of all who reside on U.S. soil? Through this process, we have learned that many people believe the census was created by our founding fathers to simply get a number. Seriously. While many of the agencies and programs we have today did not exist in the early days of our country, of our nation, we know that they exist only after countless numbers of meetings and compromises that make us a better people. So why are we jeopardizing the right to a good education for our children, the health care of our most vulnerable, and the ability to plan and maintain our local infrastructure? Just to name a few. My name is Carlos Eduardo Toón Ruiz, the son of Carlos and Sonia Toón, who immigrated from Colombia. But first, I am an American. I am a Rhode Islander and a resident of the city of Pawtucket. If the 2018 end-to-end test is any indication or glimpse of what is to come, we are in big, big trouble. The test, the only one in the U.S., was in my backyard of Providence County. Ladies and gentlemen, the tactics to turn off and alienate people work. The fear invoked and lack of participation is compromising one of our congressional seats, and the accurate funds that follow are at risk. Will those who get more than their fair share celebrate the demise of those in need? I know we are better than that. Let's not let it hit home before this plea makes sense. As a state legislator from the state who was from the first state who went into the recession and amongst the last to pull out, we cannot afford this. These are the stories that we will hear, we will see, and we'll hear about across the U.S. The numbers are going to reflect an exodus, an artificial migration from the urban cores. Countless urban communities who are already struggling will be forced to run their cities with the same challenges and less resources. This manipulation and tampering of a mandate that dates back to our founding fathers, who are revered, yet we justify a double standard. This would be nothing short of insulting to their intelligence and sacrifice. At first glance, there will be winners and losers, but if the communities who have struggled to survive with minimum resources are stripped, then something's got to give. Those winners will have to carry the cost of those impacted. Regardless of where you live and who you are, folks, your taxes are going to go up. Businesses, small and large, may not experience a halt, but definitely a slowing down of their activity. In closing, let's not let this tragedy occur. Let's not let the patient, organic influence built over decades dissipate. It will be unfair. It will be an unfair usurpation of power. Let's unite behind that red, white, and blue flag and be that considerate, caring, and compassionate nation. Let's be Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. The next steps for the Commission is that this afternoon we will be going up to the Hill and delivering copies of this report to both majority and minority members of oversight committees and appropriations committees, to the chairs of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and the Congressional Hispanic Conference, so that Congress is put on notice as to what the Commission heard throughout the country. But the message that we heard loud and clear from our community is that the Bureau must act with urgency. The census is in crisis, and the Bureau must act in kind. We also know that if the decision to keep the citizenship question is made by the Supreme Court, that we will be ready to respond. We will be monitoring the Census Bureau's plans and its tests of a citizenship questionnaire in June and July of this year. We will be monitoring that test and its results and assess how the Bureau will be using those results to amend its non-response follow-up protocols in 2020. We will press the Census Bureau for full clarification of what its non-response follow-ups procedures and protocols will be as a result of its tests and the impact of the question if it remains. The NALEO Educational Fund will also conduct additional message research so that we can identify those messages and messengers that will be most effective in assuring our community about the importance of participating in Census 2020 and its safety and confidentiality. And finally, we will work to prevent and stop any threat to confidentiality and to count suppression. We will be vigilant every single step of the way throughout Census 20 enumeration to ensure that every single person is counted in 2020. In that regard, we launched, and I'll go to this. We launched on April 1st of this year our 2020 census campaign, Hágase Contar, which is a national effort that we are leading, but in partnership with our sister national Latino organizations and regional and local organizations across the country. It has a number of components that are indicated here, and we basically are going to leverage all the resources and the leadership and the skills that exist in our community and put these to work for a full census count. We have a particular campaign aimed at the achieving a full count of very young Latino children, knowing that the Census Bureau missed 400,000 such children in 2020. We cannot allow such an undercount to be repeated. Thank you for joining us today as we continue on this effort to ensure that the Census Bureau is able to comply with its mandate to count everybody in the country. And if I can invite the co-chairs of the commission up, we'll take some questions. Maria.
Yes, Maria Peña with Telemundo Digital. I did have a question for Mr. Padilla, if you don't mind. The census official said that the information will be safeguarded, it will be confidential and safe, that there are penalties involved for unauthorized use. So what are you guys doing to launch a campaign to convey the message that people need not worry that their information is going to be shared with ICE or any other DHS agencies? What are you doing on that end? And then the other two questions, is it optional to not answer the citizenship question? And the last question, have you looked at the impact that this would have on mixed status families? I know you guys are saying that a lot of people are afraid because they're undocumented. What about those families that have all kinds of different immigration status with their family members? Have you looked at that impact? So those three questions. Thank you.
So I'll tackle the first. Already we're integrating that privacy. Already we're integrating that privacy and security information with our messaging to everybody of why it's important to participate in the census as part of affording them the confidence that they need and deserve to be able to participate next year. But it doesn't stop there. It's great to hear these assurances from James Christie. We need to hear from his higher-ups, both within the Bureau, as well as the department, as well as the White House. And even when we hear those assurances, assuming we do, we need to trust but verify. So we will deploy all of our strategies, political, legislative, and legal, to ensure that the data is indeed protected, secured, and not used or abused for any other purposes that are not authorized by federal law.
Let me take the third question you asked about the evidence about the impact of mixed status families. Let's remember that there were 7 lawsuits filed challenging the inclusion of the citizenship question, 2 in New York, 2 in California, 2 in Maryland, 1 here in the District of Columbia. 6 of those lawsuits have reached verdict. 3 federal judges held that the Secretary violated the Administrative Procedures Act in adding the question. 2 judges held that the inclusion of the question is in violation of the Constitution, and they did so based on extensive research entered into litigation that was submitted by the plaintiffs about the impact the question will have. The judges found, based on the research, that a citizenship question would suppress the enumeration of Latinos and immigrants. It's not an assumption, it is fact. And so I would refer all of you to the court record that has there all of the research that was submitted in those lawsuits. Now, with regard to, is it optional? We all know that participation in the census is required by law. It is required that all of us participate and answer the questions, the forms, completely and accurately. Now, that's what the Bureau will tell us. And the Bureau will also tell us that any form that is submitted that is incomplete runs the risk of having some kind of follow-up contact, whether it's by phone or a knock on the door. So one of the things we want to ensure that is everybody submits a census form from the get-go, so that there is no reason for people to fear somebody coming to follow up and knock on their doors. That will be the first thing we're going to do, is to ensure people respond beginning in mid-March of 2020. The Bureau has also suggested that if a question is left blank, that household will still be enumerated, regardless of a missing information of a single question. But that's the kind of clarity we want from the Census Bureau. We want to hear it from them so that the public understands clearly what will happen, which is why we need to wait and see the results of the July 2019 test to see how the Bureau will amend its non-response follow-up procedures based on this last-minute test that it's adding, because it itself doesn't know what's going to happen in the field, because it wasn't the career professionals at the Bureau who decided to add this question. Patricia?
Yes. Oh,
yes, sir.
okay. Yes. Just a quick question. What is the budget you have received from the census? How are you planning to spend it? Reaching out non-traditional newspapers like online, and also grassroots marketing, going to churches, going to non-profit organizations. Can you talk about it?
Yeah. Not a single penny from the Census Bureau is going to NALEO Educational Fund or any nonprofit organization to assist in carrying out public outreach activities with the census. All of our efforts are funded through the generosity of philanthropy, of foundations around the country that have mobilized to help support the civil sector in this country, to help the country achieve its constitutional mandate of a decennial enumeration. We will closely monitor how the Census Bureau will spend its resources for communications, for outreach, that it hires the right people in the right places to carry out this enumeration. We're getting no money from the Bureau. All of our efforts are being done because we know this census is in trouble, and we in the civil sector, in the public sector, elected and appointed officials across the country need to come to the Bureau's rescue to ensure that 2020 is not a disaster.
Why it is in trouble? What will you say?
The census is in trouble because the Bureau was underfunded for the past 5 years, and its planning and preparations for 2020. It's being forced to carry out a census it did not intend to do by having a last-minute, untested, unplanned citizenship question added on if the Supreme Court so decides. And there were other changes that the Bureau had hoped to do for 2020 with regard to the collection of race and ethnic data and other procedures that it is not able to do because the administration is preventing it from doing so. Libby?
I would just also like to add we know the Bureau's effort is not going to be enough. So we have a responsibility, those of us that are elected, and also work with civic organizations, non-for-profit organizations in our community, to encourage everyone to be able to provide a line item. As you can see, and you heard Secretary of State Alex Padilla, California is leading this effort with the appropriations appropriated. California gets it. But unfortunately, states like Florida, many states across this nation have not started the state effort and then trickling down to our counties and local efforts. So I encourage every city, every county, and obviously every state, and we're advocating at the highest level to be able to ensure that they have a complete count committee and fund this, because we have a responsibility to ensure that our communities are counted beyond what the Census Bureau is doing. We know that that is not going to be enough, and unfortunately, it's going to rest on our shoulders, and we're going to have to live with these numbers for 10 years.
Commissioner, I have a question for you and also for Arturo Navarro. In particular about counting undocumented immigrants in states that have large populations of undocumented immigrants, such as Florida and Texas, for instance, where all 4 of the senators from both of those states have said that they have no problem with the citizenship question being added to the census. As a resident of Florida and as a member of the commission, what are you going to do to help ensure that the undocumented population in Florida and other states that have large undocumented populations are not, because as one of the commissioners said, there is a real fear out there. And the question to you, Arturo, is when you go up to the Hill today, when you talk about that sort of thing, when you're going to have that kind of pushback from members who say, I don't have a problem with this, including, a Latino member of the Senate.
Yeah. I think as a community leader, and obviously I represent the 4th largest school district in the nation, I have a responsibility. I was elected to serve my community and to ensure my community was counted. So despite what is going on in states and communities where you have this kind of rhetoric, I know my responsibility, and it is to make sure that the message is correct, that I educate my community, and that I work with local leaders, because at the end of the day, not only will the state lose, but our local communities, our children were undercounted in Miami-Dade, and I know that I will not allow this to happen again in my community, and so that every community that faces these issues and these unfortunate issues that are facing this nation at this time, we have to stand up. We have a responsibility, and we cannot let anybody's voice be louder than ours.
If I may, before Arturo comes up, just add to the following. Arturo touched on it in the previous comments about the impact of a citizenship question on the census. Our concern is not speculation. It's based on historical evidence. The presence of a question about citizenship on the census or on the decennial census will discourage or in some cases intimidate people from participating, which undermines the very purpose of the census. The Constitution calls for every 10 years a national population count. Anything that takes away from that or limits our ability to achieve that undermines the very purpose of the census. So if you look at historical evidence and the scientific advisors to the census, in addition to the documents that have supported the lawsuits, it all arrives at the same conclusion.
But you're going up to the Hill to basically, present this report and say, this is important, but you're going to have these members who are going to say, I have no problem with that.
And that's part of the job that we need to do. We need to share with these members of the Senate and the House the facts. The fact is that there has never been an accurate count of the Latino population in the United States. In fact, one of the counties that had the largest undercount of very young Latino children was Miami-Dade. And that will happen again if we don't do everything we need to do and adopt the recommendations of the commission. And we would like to remind Senator Rubio and Senator Scott that their state is at risk of having a worse count than in 2010 to their own detriment. If any person is not counted, the entire community where that person lives suffers.
Hello, my name is Arnoldo Alonso. I can speak very loud, so if you guys can hear me, I don't know, when are we better? Oh, the camera, okay, great. So first of all, thank you. I'm with the We Act Environmental Justice Organization, but I was born and raised in El Valle, which is Cameron County and Hidalgo County. I was raised in Brownsville. One of the issues that I'm seeing with this is that our kids are definitely under 18, undercounted. And one of the issues that we have is that we have colonias. These are not cities. These are not municipalities. We have no internet. We have no portable water. Your phone changes from AT&T to Telcel. And we are very poor and we're very underfunded. So how would you address the issue with counting colonias where some of these cities are not actually in maps, right? So you have to know where to go to find these small communities. And they're everything south of San Antonio, all the way from El Paso, all the way to Brownsville. So that's my question, like how do you answer that riddle and making sure like rural Latinos are counted?
At its regional hearing in San Antonio, the commission did hear testimony from representatives of people who live in the colonias and along the border about the particular challenges that exist there. I can say that in 2010, the Bureau actually had a major disaster happen in the colonias because of a miscommunication that it had with the leadership in the colonias. We were telling everybody in 2010 to expect the census form in the mail. We didn't learn until the census began in 2010 that the Bureau never intended to mail forms to the colonias, but in fact, it was going to hand deliver them in an operation called Update Leave. And that was not communicated. So one of the things that we have made very clear with the Bureau is you have to tell the public what to expect. And that is one of the recommendations of the commission. We do know that in 2020, the Bureau will carry out Update Leave again in the colonias, which means that the Bureau will hire enumerators to go throughout these rural communities and hand deliver a census package that'll include a letter asking people to go online, to fill out the form, and it will include a paper questionnaire. But it'll only leave it behind. The enumerators won't actually enumerate the household on the spot. Why not? Because that costs resources. Resources that Congress is not appropriating so that the Bureau could better do update, enumerate. Update the address and enumerate the household then and there. And these are some of the consequences of what happens when the Congress fails to adequately appropriate and give the Bureau the capacity it needs.
Good morning. My name is Adolfo Mercado, Californio Perdido out here in D.C. Sacramento is my hometown, and I'm currently studying to be a Franciscan friar. So I'm curious, are there any recommendations or the discussion around, I hear lots of nonprofits being mentioned, but particularly with the faith-based community. And as somebody who's studying to be a priest, I haven't received anything about that. So I'm just curious, what's the plan as far as trying to use the faith-based communities to get a better count?
We do know that there are trusted messengers in our community. Many of them are teachers. Many of them are first responders and also faith leaders, pastors, priests, and also people who go to the same church as you do. That's one of the things that we heard also from testimony is that sometimes it's not the cleric that's the most credible person, but it's the people you go to church with, the people you go to temple with. So this is how we need to do that kind of networking and outreach. We also plan to incorporate something that we'll call Census Sunday. I believe will be March 29th, 2020, the Sunday closest to Census Day, April 1st, 2020, where we're going to work with the U.S. There you go, them. And other denominations, so that on that Sunday and subsequent Sundays throughout April, that people are reminded from the pulpit about the importance of participating in the census.
Hi, good evening. My name is Alvi, and I work with the Office of Councilmember Taveras. She represents Prince George's County Council District 2. And so I have two questions. One of them, the first one is, so it was mentioned that residents will be reached in non-traditional housing. And so, at least in our area, we have many families that live, multiple families that live in single-family homes. And so I wanted to know what was the plan around that. And also the second question is, how does one become a canvasser for the census? Because I have a couple ideas that I think we would be able to pitch out to some of our community partners.
Yeah. So in order to get a job at the Census Bureau, you have to go to census.gov, usajobs.gov, because you can only apply for a job online to work for the census. So that in itself is a challenge, but that is how we need to drive good people who want to work at the Census Bureau to get jobs, is by doing it through the online processes. There'll be plenty of opportunities to volunteer with our organizations. So we look forward to working with you and seeing what we can do in this area with the nonprofit sector. With regard to non-traditional housing, this is where the outreach is so important, because even though a household may have multiple families, they're only going to get one form in the mail or only one letter asking them to go online. One of the advantages of an online census is that up to 99 people could be included on a form for a particular household. So there's the opportunity to do that. The Bureau also tells us that this is the first census where people can respond without a unique ID identifier. So that if somebody thinks they weren't counted, they can also go online and fill out a census form. And then the Bureau would see if there's a duplicate later or not on the back end. Or you can call in your information. The Bureau's going to have a massive phone banking operation to receive that information by phone. So part of our job is to make sure that the community understands all these options available to participate, online, on phone, or by paper.
Hi, Christian Hernandez with the Center for Public Integrity. So I'm wondering, what were the effects of the undercount of children ages 0 to 5 in Miami-Dade and other places, I guess, that the commission heard from? And so what were the effects? Why were these children undercounted? And also, has there been any effort to quantify how much of the grants they were supposed to receive weren't received at these communities?
Well, the fact remains that every single person not counted, whether you're 1 month old or you're 50 years old, the impact initially is the same. That community will get less than its fair share of political representation and resources. Now, the irony with the undercount of very young children is that there are many programs designed to meet the needs of young children that use census data to determine how much funding should go to those communities. Head Start, for example, uses census numbers to determine how much of an allocation should go to a community. So Miami-Dade, for the past 10 years, has gotten less than its fair share of Head Start funding because not every child was counted. I would refer you to Andrew Reamer's research at George Washington University. If you go to the George Washington University, just if you Google Andrew Reamer, he has updated all federal programs that use census data and their formulas to determine funding allocations and has estimated cost loss to states and communities based on the undercount.
Do you know why these children were not counted? I mean, the last report from NALEO was like nearly 500,000 children.
Well, one of the things we do know is that the majority of the children not counted in the census lived in a home that returned the form. So as far as the Census Bureau is concerned, that house was counted, that family was counted, even though not everybody was put on the form. Why an adult decides not to include children on the form is the kind of research we've been doing. And we've learned that if the child is not a direct relative, the person filling out the form will say, well, he's not my son, she's not my daughter, she's my niece or my nephew or my grandchild, so I'm not going to include them because they're not part of my family. And that's the kind of information we need to get out. That you need to put everybody on your form who lives in your household, related to you or not, regardless of how they're related to you. And that's part of the education we need to do with adults about making sure all children get counted. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us. And we have a lot of work to do. And as I think it was Mr. Tejada said, the work begins now. I'd like to invite our co-chairs of the commission, though, to bring the commission process to an end.
We began this process by banging down the gavel months and months ago in Los Angeles, California, and now we bring this commission to conclusion here in Washington, D.C.